I'm tempted to talk again about the Wu flu today, since I just watched President Trump's conference on the whole situation. But frankly, I think that can wait for tomorrow at the very least. I think of more important concerns, something that is getting underreported as of right now, that only seems to be, I guess, sort of trickling through the alternative media, routes, is this whole phone call involving Cassandra Fairbanks and the involvement of Ambassador Richard Grenell in the arrest of Julian Assange. Assange's extradition trial has, just kicked off here recently, and of course I talked before about this whole situation regarding an offer from Dana Rohrabacher for, a sort of a not really a plea bargain, but a way in which Assange was being offered to work with the Trump administration to get out of the predicament that he finds himself in, to where the intelligence community is essentially going to throw the book at him and try and make an example of him and ruin his life. Essentially, the deal is that if Assange provided proof that the Russians didn't hack the DNC emails and give them to him, that he could get a pardon. But of course, the proof that Assange would have to provide would be ratting out his source. In which case, if you are a journalist and you rat out one of your sources, well, you're never going to get another source again. So Assange and WikiLeaks would be neutered from that point on. They would never, be able to do anything at all. Whereas, if Assange doesn't take this deal, and he, sort of takes his lumps and eventually, may very well, be a victim of the death penalty here in the United States if extradited and brought up on charges under the Espionage Act. Well, his organization, after his death, will be able to live on and continue to, get leaks and things, because what he's built up in the form of WikiLeaks is, a pretty potent organization that has accomplished quite a bit. And so, from what we know, Assange did not take this deal. And it's confirmed now. Dana Rohrabacher came out. I was suspicious of this story when it came out. I didn't think that that this really sounded plausible. I didn't really understand the details under which this would make sense for the Trump administration to offer Assange a pardon. To say, because it was being reported essentially, because there was a huge media distortion of the story. It was kind of like a game of telephone, but with players who maliciously wanted to manipulate the story. And so they spun it as that, Trump offered to pardon Assange if he helped him cover up Russian hacking, which, of course, is very far from the truth. I knew that immediately. But what it seemed like is that all he wanted Assange to do was to deny that he got the emails from the Russians, which he's already done publicly. So it didn't make any sense, to offer that as a condition. Now, proof, meaning ratting out his source, that makes a lot more sense. And so here we are. We find ourselves down the road here. Assange has been arrested. He's no longer in the Ecuadorian embassy in London. He's no longer has political asylum from Ecuador. And so now his lawyers are trying to stop him from being extradited to the United States. And the tack that they're taking in the British courts is that Assange is not being extradited, for legitimate criminal reasons, because he's being accused of committing a crime, but rather he's being they're arguing that the U.S. wants to extradite him and hold him as a political prisoner. And this is a very interesting case because essentially and I'll get into the details of this, what they're saying is that Ambassador Richard Grenell, who of course, prior to being the ambassador to Germany under Trump, was a Fox News commentator, he was appointed ambassador to Germany, and during that time, he apparently had some communications with the Ecuadorian government, trying to work out some kind of a deal in which they would release Assange into British custody so that the U.S. would be able to extradite him. And apparently he tried to work out a deal and said, hey, if you let him out and you hand Assange over to us, we will not execute him. We will take the death penalty off the table. That was supposedly the deal that Richard Grenell tried to work out with the Ecuadorians. Richard Grenell, fast forward now, is the acting director of national intelligence. That's not exactly as strange of a shift. going from being an ambassador to the director of national intelligence, because for the most part, depending on what country you're talking about, as many as 50% of the diplomats in that country may very well be spies. That's pretty much why countries still have embassies. There's no real practical reason in the 21st century for countries to have embassies all over the world other than as a base, a forward operating base for spies. And so Richard Grenell, as the ambassador to a country like Germany, is most likely an intelligence officer already. And so it makes sense for him to be, conducting these sorts of operations. Now you may be asking, how is this a political operation? What is political about this? Well, that's where this call, and these records, provided by Cassandra Fairbanks to the defense, which have now been leaked and which she posted on Twitter and is everywhere now. Well, everywhere that is posting, you can find this information, is what I'm telling you. It doesn't seem to be covered real broadly. This is by no means front-page news on any major newspaper. It's not going to make it into the 6 o'clock news on your any network TV. But apparently, Fairbanks had a source who was close to Richard Grenell, a man by the name of Arthur Schwartz, who was apparently a private citizen at this time, but who was advising Richard Grenell or was close to him and knew the details of this whole plot. And he apparently, in some calls leaked by Cassandra Fairbanks, well, not leaked by her initially, I shouldn't say that, leaked by other people who had the calls. She apparently made it clear on Twitter that she did not want them leaked. She only wanted to give them to Julian Assange's defense team to be used in court because in the call, Arthur Schwartz implicates President Trump in sort of directing Grenell to try and organize this extradition of Assange. And I guess the chain of events here is that you have Rohrabacher go over and offer Assange this olive branch, saying, "Hey, give us your source, and Trump will pardon you." Assange says no, and then Trump directs Grenell, "Hey, let's try and get the Ecuadorians to give up Assange so we can get him." And what the point is here, the reason why the Assange defense team is saying that this is a political move is because this is revenge, because Trump, for political reasons, wanted to know Assange's source because, of course, if Assange gave up his source, it would debunk the Russia collusion myth, and that since Assange didn't give up that source, Trump wanted to punish him. I believe I have all the details right as far as what exactly their point is. Now, I don't know enough about the UK court system, and to the extent that they are in line with American foreign policy to know whether or not this will work. Generally, of course, the UK, like most countries in the world, the death penalty is an anathema to them. So I think Assange's folks would do very well trying to stress that Assange is under penalty of death if extradited to the United States. And also trying to blame this all on Trump and saying that this is a political witch hunt orchestrated by Trump. It seems like it's something that would generally work towards a UK audience, since the Orange Man Bad is a very popular narrative over there, even more so, dare I say, than it is here. But then again, right now you have a Tory-led government in Westminster under Boris Johnson, which fancies itself quite close to the Trump administration. And so I don't know to the extent that UK courts are truly independent from Downing Street. Or, who appointed this particular judge who is acting in this case. Because I assume that the way that the judiciary works in the UK is somewhat similar to the United States, because I assume, like most institutions, the American judiciary was at least partially based on the English judiciary, meaning that Parliament would have some role in appointing these judges, and therefore that these are somewhat political appointments. And so I don't know necessarily, which political faction appointed this particular judge, and how he's dealt on cases in the past. I haven't looked enough into this. I'm not an expert on the UK judiciary. But I would hope that for Assange's sake, that his legal team is familiar with this particular judge and is tailoring this message towards something that that would appeal to him or her. Because frankly, I think that it could also be argued that the evidence that I've seen is not indicative of any sort of political favoritism. You could make the case that sure, after Trump was unable to negotiate with Assange, it was perfectly reasonable for him then to direct his government, all people in it, including Richard Grenell, to try and take him down. They could try and analogize this and say, well, this is very similar to what, a prosecutor would do in trying to get, someone to plead guilty. Obviously, the mechanics are not exactly the same, but it's a decent analogy that could be drawn. Now, with that said, I don't think that this evidence has been presented in court yet, and it'll be very interesting to see how how the UK press interprets all this to the extent that they're covering it. I think that I probably should start watching them for reaction on this as things go along. Because I'd imagine that the UK press would be a little more in tune with, what may or may not appeal to the court and to how his case is looking. So I'll try and keep an eye on this story, and for the time being, if you gain anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and sharing this video. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe, because I do upload every day, and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.